Hello, everybody, and welcome to What's Up with Mo with Pete and Joe, our weekly podcast discussion about Missouri politics and the future of the Show Me State. I am Joe Zahn, former babyface lead singer from St. Louis's famous unknown early 2000s boy band 3D.
Oh boy, that goes back, Joe. I knew you then. I am Peter Meredith, a former state rep for St. Louis in the Missouri legislature. As of a couple days ago here, I am no longer in the House after serving my time. I guess I'm on parole, maybe. And a lawyer and a dad over here with a little kid that might distract us a little bit. And I coach a bunch of teams. So that's who I am.
I love it. So how has this week been for you? I mean, we had Snowmageddon. We talked about it a little bit last week. And I don't know about you, but my daughter was, she was only in school one day this past week.
One of my daughters was not in school at all this week. One of them was in school one day and one was in school 2 days because they, of course, all go to 3 different schools. And yeah, it was a rough week. Really, just extending the holiday for another week of not being able to work. It's super fun, isn't it?
Yeah, well, this is, you know what? Let's have some real fun then, and let's talk about some news. What do you say?
Hey, let's jump in.
Okay, so let's start with session because it just began, and for the first time, at least that I remember watching the legislature, there was a contested vote for speaker.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yes, John Patterson easily won, but he was contested by another Republican, Justin Sparks.
That's right.
Yeah. So what do you think, Pete? I mean, this is rare.
It's incredibly rare. Usually they figure this out. They voted on Justin Patterson as a caucus, the Republican caucus, last year. Right. They do this before even the newly electeds come in. It's a really interesting thing how they do it as a party. And so they come in and this is all then pomp and circumstance. Right. And John Patterson has already established all of what the rules are going to be for this year. They've made all their plans about where committee assignments are going to be, things like that. They've been working all this with him being the assumed speaker. But here we are with the Freedom Caucus, as they call themselves. We call them the terrorists or the crazy caucus or a variety.
The farthest right. Conservative.
Yeah, it's not always even right left. It's really just they want to disrupt and point fingers and call people rhinos and things like that and make a big show. In the Senate, that's actually somewhat effective at killing a whole lot of legislation and getting attention and sometimes getting what you want out of it. In the House, on the other hand, the way things are structured, the speaker has all the power, right? The speaker and the floor leader just control absolutely everything. I mean, it's frightening, and to the point that, people like Justin Sparks that ran, he had a proposed package of rules that would have weakened the speaker's power this year. And this is a conversation we have every 2 years because for the last 30 years since they've been in charge, they have increased all of the rules that concentrate power in the hands of the speaker. Mm-hmm. And year after year, and we talk about this, we need to undo all of this and get back to a functioning democracy, right? So he makes some good points here, but the reason it doesn't happen and nobody ever actually usually tries to run against him the way that he just did is because those rules are still in place, right? And so he gets to use them to just completely silence or make somebody irrelevant in the House. And frankly, that's probably what's going to happen to Representative Sparks and maybe some of the folks that voted for him as well, because the speaker will just say, all right, you don't get any of the committee chairs that you might have gotten. You don't get any of the committee assignments you would have gotten, and your bills aren't going to move.
It also is pretty wild that you just mentioned it sort of in passing, but the speaker, so much power is consolidated into the speaker's office, and the newly elected folks don't even get to have any say in who the speaker is. That's pretty amazing. And this year in particular, there's a pretty significant amount of new people.
And for the most part, they really don't know what they're walking into. I mean, I can't tell you, when I went on that freshman tour my first year, I talked to all these Republicans that were bright-eyed like we were, and thought, we're going to be different. We're going to work together. We're going to help you get bills passed. We agree on so much. Let's do this stuff. And it took a month into office when they're looking at you going, yeah, I know that you see that I just agreed with you and still voted this way anyway, but you understand that that's because he threatened me with my bill. And
So,
next thing you know, they've fallen in line on everything, and they're saying all the crazy stuff, all the whatever rhetoric they're supposed to say, because of they're trying to hold on to that little hope that they're going to be in power at some point, or that they're going to get their one little thing done for their district that they cared about, that is otherwise being held over their head by a very all powerful speaker, really, in the House. It's interesting, and so a bunch of those folks that voted for him, if it's their first year in there, and they came in and they were probably told, "Look at how crazy these rules are. Can't we do something different?" Or they thought John Patterson, is maybe presented as too moderate for them, and so they want to make a show of how strong they are, like those senators did last year in the Freedom Caucus, and they're going to have a lesson to learn pretty quickly that that's not going to go well for them in any way, really.
yeah,
Not in the House.
it sounds like the supermajority is functioning really well here in Missouri. And it seems like you mentioned the Freedom Caucus
Yeah.
several times, so the people that at least view themselves as that. And I often think of them as frustrated conservatives.
Yeah. Yeah.
Many of them say that the real problem here in Missouri is the rhinos,
Uh-huh.
is the Republicans in name only, who they say are really Republicans in name only, but they always seem to vote for all the Republican stuff, weirdly.
Amazing. Who'd have thought?
Yeah, amazing, isn't it? But I do think it's kind of funny that so we have a bill. Representative Dane Deal, who is a Republican from Butler, I guess thinks that this whole rhino thing is pretty silly because, in fact, he has offered a bill to make the rhino the official zoo animal here in Missouri.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I'm trying to wrap my head around this because I can't tell how much of this he actually intended at the time he filed the bill to be commentary on this, the political term rhino that they use all the time, and that is huge
Mhm.
within their caucus. Like, it is a huge source of fighting. This whole election between Sparks going after Patterson was calling Patterson a rhino the whole time, right? Like,
Oh, yeah,
but
absolutely.
but I think it's possible that Dane Deal actually was trying to do a St. Louis versus Kansas City thing with this.
He cited the fact that Kansas City and St. Louis both have white rhinos in their zoo, and he thought it was important to bring awareness to that fact.
Oh, wait,
Uh,
wait. So we both have the same rhino? It wasn't that Kansas City has a
no,
rhino
no, no,
that St.
no.
Louis
They
doesn't?
both have white rhinos. And he specifically said
Oh,
that's so he was trying to bring awareness. Now,
yeah. Then he's just effing around with people.
yeah,
I mean,
it's
that's what's happening. He thinks it's funny. He's kind of a goofball. He's everybody's friend. Really nice guy, honestly. But he probably takes his job that seriously and thinks it's funny to file a bill, legislation, that a law, right, to put in
yeah,
statute, to waste the time of the Missouri legislature on this because he thinks it's funny. I'm sure that's it.
yeah. I mean, I think again, it's a funny thing. It feels like a bunch of like catty little middle school kids all picking at each other.
Yeah.
But
Well,
this is
he's a sophomore now, I think. So, we call them freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors. I think sophomore is the year that he's trying to establish himself as the class clown, right?
yeah,
It is
sure.
high school, Joe. It is high school.
Yeah, it's so wild to me that
Although high
this is
school is more functional, I think.
maybe, but this is the legislative body that's leading our state, that we have entrusted with the power to lead the state, and they're acting like a bunch of middle school children.
That
But
tracks. That tracks.
what do I know? So Representative Tara Peters is a Republican from Rolla, and she
Hmm.
thinks that Missouri should stop taking money from inmates in jail. She has a bill, it's HB 723, which would help to stop a law that's currently in place that allows the Attorney General to file suit to take
Yeah.
away the assets of people who are convicted of crimes in Missouri. This is the Missouri Incarceration Reimbursement Act. That's right. You did not hear incorrectly. The state of Missouri can literally rob people after they have served their sentence for a crime. I don't know how we expect people to be able to recover after that, but yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess this seems like a bill that I would support. But the thing that's blowing my mind, Peter, is this is a real thing.
Yeah, well, there have been some interesting. I think Tony Messenger has done some reporting on this in St. Louis. Really good reporting on some of the specific stories of folks this has happened to. Like, I think there was a woman that was pregnant, had a new child coming out of prison, was trying to like rebuild her life, and the state came after like the only assets she had, literally the only assets she had. So she's going to come out of prison and have a very difficult time finding a job because it's very hard to find a job in this market, period, let alone if you have a criminal record. Trying to raise a kid, and she's got this little bit that she tried to save even while she went to prison, and now the state's coming and taking that too. It's a disaster. I mean,
It's cruel.
and
It
of
feels
course,
cruel.
I will say it's a tricky one because there's this element of restorative justice where the idea that people should be able to repay something for their crime is something that actually I and a lot of progressives support. But when we talk about that, we're talking about to the victim, right? We're
Hmm.
talking about trying to pay restorative, try to restore the victim in any way they can. And
Sure.
sort of like in a civil lawsuit, you would have to. But because you've gone to prison, it kind of takes away a lot of folks' ability to even do that, right? And so when you're instead targeting people who are already at rock bottom, already have nothing, and telling them you're going to take everything they do have left, you're actually going to just make the problem worse. It's sort of the opposite of restorative justice. And of course, wealthy folks that get arrested, this doesn't happen to.
Right.
You don't have the stories of those situations. Um, so it's discriminatorily applied, especially because it's up to the discretion of our attorney general, who, as we've seen, is pretty selective about who they tend to be supportive of helping in the criminal justice system and who they turn their backs on in the criminal justice system. So I think it's a terrible approach. We as a state and taxpayers have to pay the cost of incarcerating people that we should believe need to be incarcerated. I would argue we dramatically over incarcerate people, and we don't get to fix that problem by then punishing them even more. That's not going to help us as a state. But I
Well,
will say, this is a Republican that filed this, right?
yep.
Tara Peters. And
Yep.
this is one of those times where some of those Republicans that I worked with, especially on the further right, I tell you, she's on the further right on a lot of issues from me. It's where the two circles kind of meet again on criminal justice issues a lot of times. And we see some real ability to work together with people that strongly disagree with each other. And it's really more the folks in the middle that are like the always hammering the law and order hammer because they think it's a good political message that get in the way of changes like this.
Yeah, I'd love to see something like this actually pass. And again, we called her out, and if it passes, we'll call her out again. I mean, you deserve credit when you do
Absolutely.
good stuff. But it still blows my mind. I can't believe that we live in a society. I mean, I know it's just like a colloquialism, or that for us to say, it's not in law that we say you've paid your debt to
Oh,
society,
yeah.
right? But that's the idea. When people go to prison, when people go to jail, they've paid their debt to society. We should allow them a path
Yeah.
to, have a normal life.
Well, for their sake, but also for our sake as a society, right?
Yes.
It costs us a lot more if they're not able to reintegrate into society. That's when we have higher rates of recidivism and people ending up committing the same types of crimes or worse than they did that got them in prison in the first place. If our goal of prison isn't to be able to rehabilitate people so that when they come back out, they can actually participate well in society, then instead, all we're doing is tearing apart lives even further and really causing more of a threat to society than what our criminal justice system is supposed to do the opposite, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think if you look at cases in other countries, as an example, there are lots of other countries that do this differently, that also have recidivism rates
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
are significantly lower than ours. And at the end of the day, to your point, it's a cost to put people in jail.
Right.
We're talking about saving money. If you can prevent people from committing crimes again and ending up back in jail, you're going to save money in the long run. And it's going to be better for society. But
Exactly right. And well, and a lot of these folks, it's nonviolent crimes that I would argue some cases are victimless crimes that they're in prison to begin with for. And then they're coming out and they're being told they also have to lose all of their money. And it's like,
yeah,
I mean, one or the other is civil lawsuit or criminal lawsuit, right? Like, you can't just take everything a person has and expect them to then be a better participant in our society or in your community when they come back. Doesn't work that way.
No. Missouri utility companies may soon be allowed to set rates based on projected expenses versus actual costs, Peter. So basically, we've got a couple GOP sponsored bills that could significantly raise utility prices for all of us. And boy, utility companies sure do want it. These for-profit utility companies, they are highly regulated in Missouri, as they are in most states, because they are legal monopolies.
Right.
So can you explain to me, Peter, why would it be a good idea for us to allow monopolies to have more freedom to charge us whatever their greedy little hearts desire?
Right. Well, so they're all capped, these utility companies. I think it's like 8% that they're allowed to make in profit each year. Which means that if you are a for-profit business, which they are, and their job is to increase profits for their shareholders, their only way to do that when they're limited by that highly regulated monopoly they've got is by increasing the market. And so what they often have started doing around the country is they'll say, well, we want to build these other facilities to help generate new power. They have to try and make the argument to the state that they're going to be able to, that there's going to be a demand for that power. But then they say, we're going to start billing people now for the cost of that development that we're going to do. And we've seen this happen in places where they start recouping costs, especially for things like we've seen it for nuclear plants. They'll start recouping costs, they'll recoup costs, they'll be charging significantly higher utility rates. So you and I, everyone around us, we're all paying higher bills for this plant they're trying to build. And then the plant never actually gets online.
Yeah.
So it doesn't actually even do what they say they're going to do. And then guess what they're going to do a year later? They're going to say, well, that plan didn't work. So we have to come up with a different plant that we're going to build that's a different type of energy in this other place. So now we need to start charging people for that. Well, the more they spend, even if it's on things that don't actually end up adding value for consumers, they get to take 8% profit from that spending, essentially, to be within their limits. So they're increasing their profit without increasing any value or any new energy or anything else for the consumers. That's capitalism, right? If we've got a monopoly system like this, though, that we're supposed to be regulating, but we want it to be run like a capitalist business, this is what we should expect. They're going to come at us and try and find every way they can to make more profit from their business. Now, this has been tried in a variety of forms year after year, every year that I've been there, and I think before I was there. I think that this year there's a big concern that this push is going to be more effective. The utilities gave a lot of money to our new governor, and he seems to be very interested in paying them back for that. I think this might be one of his priorities to help make sure that those utility companies that helped him get into office have some profitable years ahead. I think these are bills to watch for sure.
Yeah. And, the other thing that's going to be interesting to me is if this passes, if utility rates go up, will Republicans pay any kind of price at the ballot box? We'll see. We'll see.
No, of course not, because then they'll just blame Democrats for inflation, is what they'll say. It's that must be Democrats' fault that prices have gone up. They're going to blame workers making more money and say we need to be paying workers less. Or they're going to say, look, it's because all those immigrants that came in apparently caused the utility companies to have to increase your bill. I don't know. They'll find a way.
Regulation that prevented them from being able to build that hypothetical power plant or whatever you were talking about. Who knows?
Sure, I'll also say it's also interesting to me, like Republicans never seem to care about utility costs and fees and things like that going up and up and up. But if you talk about paying a slightly higher tax, even if it's less than that, to pay those bills for everybody, with like a public utility, all of a sudden they're like, oh no, that's socialism. We can't have higher taxes, and we can't have a state run or a city run utility. Like that's horrifying. Somebody's got to make a profit off of this, right? Even if that means everyone's going to pay more money in the long run on their utility bills. That's fine. Those aren't taxes. They're not taxes, even though you have to pay them to keep the lights on.
Right.
No, doesn't count.
No.
And when they want to keep cutting taxes, they're going to replace them with higher things like this for those same services that the state provides, but getting them through a private for-profit company instead.
Yeah. Private services that are worse.
And necessary, that people have no choice but to use.
Yep. Well, let's talk about some national politics, Peter.
Yay.
Missouri's own Eric Schmitt has reintroduced legislation in the Senate that is aimed at reducing regulation. So uh, it is not exactly a precise piece of legislative artwork that we're looking at here. In fact, I would argue that this is the kind of legislation that could have been written in crayon by a first grader.
Sounds about right.
This basically says that if you want to enact a new regulation, you must remove three. Now, there's no
Yeah.
guideline on how. It does not say if they have to be outdated or unnecessary regulations. You just have to remove three to be able to enact a new one. Just got to hit the number.
Yep. Yep.
Want to remove lead paint from homes? Well, then I guess you got to remove the regulation on asbestos and find
Yeah,
two others
that's right.
because you got to hit the three. This doesn't seem like a smart
Or
way to
just,
run.
I guess, delete them and combine them into one. I
Yes,
mean, that's efficiency, Joe. This is back to that government efficiency
getting
conversation.
back to that
Look,
government efficiency,
look,
man.
this is what we're going to talk about all the time, right? Like, I just wish these guys took policy seriously. The fact is they don't. And I will say this is one of the reasons Democrats get beat by them a lot of times, because Democrats tend to take policy very seriously and they want to compromise. They want to work through all the nuance and details. They acknowledge when they get certain parts wrong, and then they look bad, I guess, because they had part of it wrong. Republicans, they keep it simple. He's like,
Yeah.
no, what I know my constituents believe is there are too many regulations, and I promised I was going to cut red tape. How better to do that than to simply say, I'm doing that? I have a bill that does that. It literally says new regulations mean we have to cut regulations. I don't care if that's practical. I don't care if that's good policy. I don't care if it's even going to pass. I don't care if it has any meaning whatsoever. What I know is when I go home, I get to tell my constituents at the next election, look at how I tried to help you get rid of regulations. And that's
Yeah.
why, I mean, this bill, it's the same bill that's been filed in Missouri in the legislature many years. I'm pretty sure there is already one filed this year. I'd have to look up the bill number. But it's a message that works for them. They don't care if it's real. They don't
Yeah.
care if it's serious. They don't care. It's a message that works for them, and politics comes
Yeah.
first for them.
Yeah. It's so true. It
Just like
reminds
the
me of,
government efficiency committee you mentioned.
I was
It's the same
just going
thing.
to say that it's like when they're now, I guess it's not called tweeting anymore, it's Xing or whatever. What they're posting now on X about, they're finding these really bad ways of spending government money, like on hamster training in the US government or some crap like that. But then what they don't tell you is that that is like a $30,000 grant in a $8 trillion budget.
Right, right.
So like
No,
it makes no difference.
no, they'll actively inflate the budget threefold with military spending, or the things that actually take up huge chunks of the budget, and then show you how efficient they are when they cut all these little teeny tiny pieces that they can point to. Oh, look how much they spent on toilet seats. Wasn't that one of them we talked about
Yeah,
a
yeah.
few years ago? Like, they were, look how expensive these toilet seats were. Like, that's a meaningful part of the budget, but they get to go home and say, look how effective I was at cutting government waste. And who knows even ever what the backstory of that thing was and why it actually happened. They don't care. They don't care if it was fine policy. They care how it sounds, and that short message to their constituents. That's it.
Okay. Well, so then, do you mind if I just rant real
Oh,
quick?
what you got?
Because
I love your
I love
ranting.
a topic it's gotten into my craw a little bit. It's really gotten under my skin. So I saw this post on X from Missouri's own Ben Baker a
Ah,
little while ago. And he's posted several things about this topic, which is the massive wildfires happening in Los Angeles. Um,
it's tragic.
and it is tragic. It is utterly horrible. The human suffering it's hard to imagine. But he's spending his time, as many people are online, blaming the people who are the victims based on who they voted for.
Right?
Now, if you aren't familiar with LA and wildfires there, they are dealing with a once in a generation natural disaster. I mean, these are
Yeah.
massive
Yeah.
wildfires. that are happening in a part of the state that they're not supposed to be happening in during a time of the year that they don't normally happen in because of changes in the climate, because it's drier and it's windier than it normally is. And by the way, when I say that it is drier, I mean that it hasn't rained in 8 months.
Oh my gosh.
It's windier. We're talking about 100-mile-an-hour winds, the Santa Ana winds.
Man.
These are hurricane force winds. Okay. If you haven't seen the images of the fire tornado that was just shown yesterday, I mean, but then you have people like Ben Baker and plenty of these other right-wing dickheads who want to insert themselves into this tragedy to score political points. They are spreading misinformation and people with the wildest, dumbest takes on the fire, all from folks who don't live in California, by the way.
Of course.
All bad. And it's a bad thing. Okay. Blaming victims is a bad thing. And many of these people, they are ghouls. They are acting like utter monsters. Now, people listening don't, but I was born and raised in Missouri, but I lived in California for 12 years. So I have many close friends. I have friends who have lost everything. Okay. And if you know anyone in LA, ask them, because I promise you, they know at least someone who has lost everything. Okay. This is a once in a lifetime disaster. If you're hearing that it's water, that's BS, because they've got more water in their reserves now than they basically ever than they have normally had historically for this time of year. Plus, they get their water from Northern California. The people who are pointing to brush management don't know shit about it, because first, the state only actually directly controls a small, super small portion of the state for brush management. I mean, we're talking less than 5%.
Mm-hmm.
The rest is a partnership with federal government and private parties. Second, this is freaking complicated. California's landscape is complicated because you can't just take a lawnmower out there and clear the brush, man. I mean, we're talking about mountains, we're talking about grasslands, urban areas. The grass grows year round there, unlike other places that have these kind of fires. And lastly, it's not because of DEI, which a bunch of
I saw some of those tweets.
Yes, LA fire chief, the people running the fire department there, the leader happens to be a woman and happens to be gay. But if you look at her qualifications and the qualifications of the other folks leading the firefighting efforts, they are eminently qualified. If you don't believe me, look it up yourself. And also, by the way, not for nothing, but did you know that only 3% of the LA Fire Department is actually female? And by the way, that is a smaller percentage than the national average.
Wow.
So the people who are telling you this is because unqualified minority groups have been forced into jobs, they're lying to you. Right? These people are, I guess you could call them provocateurs. You call them horrible grifters. You want to have an honest conversation, which maybe we need to have an honest conversation about disaster management in California or nationally. Fine, I get it. But this shit right here doesn't help.
No.
Blaming victims doesn't help. Blaming people because of the way they voted doesn't help. You didn't see other people doing that when hurricanes were happening, right?
I guarantee you, if it had happened in a red state in a red city, we wouldn't be seeing that.
That's exactly right. And lastly, literally blaming the people who are actually leading the disaster response in real time also isn't helping. So I guess my message is to any of those people, like Ben Baker, quite frankly, and others, you guys can go eat a whole bag of dicks for all I care.
Ben Baker's a pastor, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Ben Baker, the pastor.
Yeah.
Really doing God's work.
These guys just don't seem to have any sense of empathy for people that they don't know, that they consider to be others. If they consider somebody not part of their tribe, their empathy is non-existent, Joe. And I experienced this, that was how they were with all of us. But then when they find out that my kid is struggling or sick, they have all the empathy in the world, and sincerely, because they know me. And so then they care. And I think they care. And what I would always say is, but what about all the other kids dealing with same thing or worse that you don't know? Like, what about them? And they'd be like, no, we're just cutting their money. They're leeching off the government, right? it's just like that with this. They see a political opportunity to point fingers and gain politically, to get attention, and try and win some votes off of a message that may be straight up lies. They do not care at all about the people that are hurting, if they see that opportunity for gain. And it kind of goes with that personal responsibility narrative they have in their head. It applies to everybody else, just not them.
Right. Right.
And so they think because, whatever worked in their life, if they didn't experience a hardship, anyone else experiencing it that they don't know, it's probably their own fault. And that comes into play with this, right? They don't know these people. They see people that are from a different team in their minds, even if some of them aren't even. And they see them hurting, but they go, but that must be their own fault. It's California's own fault. Must be. It's not my problem. And that means it must be theirs.
And even if you're going to, and we've talked about this in Missouri, but even if you're going to take that stance that, oh, you get what you voted for,
right.
You voted for this, that's why you're getting stuck with these terrible things that are happening. Dude, even in California, like 40% of the people voted the way you would have wanted them to.
Right.
So what about that? What about that 4 in 10 people? Like,
they don't know them.
These people,
they don't know them.
They're good.
And they've had 30 years of practice of vilifying anybody that lives in California, let alone LA, right? I mean, that's their go-to enemy of the state to them. So they don't mind enjoying their suffering, unless they know people there. And I suspect some of the folks I work with do. And I bet we're not seeing them tweet.
Yeah, you're probably right, actually.
Because there are some of them that they're gonna understand this. I do promise you that. But they're not the ones loud and making noise and looking for political gain off it. But they're also probably not going to call them out on it either.
So the bottom line is, for anybody listening, I hope all you're doing is sending thoughts, prayers, good vibes to the people of Southern California, particularly the Los Angeles area, Los Angeles County area, and the surrounding areas that are dealing with this just unbelievable human suffering. In the links in this video, I don't know how to do it for the podcast. I'll figure it out. I'll put it in the description probably. I'll throw in some charities to potentially donate to if folks want to do that. Certainly the people in Southern California can use.
There are also some individual Kickstarters. I know. Keep an eye out on your social media feeds. If you've got people in your circles you see impacted, they're all asking for help too. So jump in and help them. They need it.
Yeah, because the other aspect of this is that a bunch of people had their insurance canceled like a month before this fire happened.
Of course.
So some of them, they're in states like this where there's these great risks. There's government-sponsored insurance usually, but it also usually doesn't cover everything. So a lot of people are doing, I have friends who are doing, like you said, Kickstarters and stuff. Because they lost their home, they lost everything, and right now they don't have a place to stay, right? Like,
and it's still going, and this is getting worse and worse. I mean, it's not done over there. Yeah. We think our snowmageddon here in Missouri was scary this week. It's nothing. We have no idea. I mean, those fires are unbelievable.
Yeah. And for anyone who sits and responds by being like, well, what about the victims of this tragedy? Or, I see a lot of people talk about hurricane victims in the South from the hurricanes that just recently happened. Like, one does
help them too. Help them too.
Help them too. And FEMA is helping them, right? And FEMA's helping Southern California now. So are a lot of other states. So are other countries, Canada and Mexico.
The problem is this is an active disaster that is still going, and it is a very difficult one to shut down and respond to. It's not just a recovery effort at this point, like where we were pretty quickly after the hurricane was a recovery effort. Now we're not even there yet.
That's exactly right. Like, another thing that I mentioned is these winds also are ongoing, right? And what you see a lot is you see these gigantic tankers that pick up a bunch of ocean water or whatever and drop it on a fire, and you think that's the easy way. Why don't they just send more planes? But they can't do that when there's 100-mile-an-hour winds, guys. That's the whole point. It's a confluence of a bunch of stuff happening that makes this unbelievably difficult to combat.
Yeah, I saw a meme the other day that was reminding people, that saying, I wish that when people saw a situation like this and they're like, well, why don't the experts do this obvious thing to fix it? Why aren't they doing that? Are they idiots? it would be nice if people would instead say, wow, it seems like this easy thing would be there, but these experts who know all about it are saying are not doing it. I wonder what the reason is that they can't. Because guess what?
Right.
There probably is. If the people that know a whole lot more than you on this topic are not doing that obvious thing, they probably know why they can't.
That's exactly right. And again, this is not to say that we can't have a retrospective and talk about the things that went
Oh, sure,
wrong,
sure.
things that can
Just
be
like with
done
each
better,
of the
especially people.
hurricanes, too. We've had plenty of things that we've
That's
done wrong in each of them for the last decade.
That's exactly right. And I promise you, they're going to do that in California. But maybe leave it to the people in California, like people like Ben Baker and the other ones. Like, worry about Missouri's shit. All right. Don't worry about
Yeah.
California. Worry about your shit. All right. So that's my rant. It's a personal uh, pain point for me. So I just wanted to get it off my
I
chest.
hear you.
Uh,
Appreciate it, Joe.
but yeah, but since I brought up DEI,
Oh, no. Oh, God.
let's finish by talking about that because I think that's a topic that's
Yeah.
a big one at front and center here in Missouri. So
Yeah.
this is the focus of the GOP. There's legislation targeting DEI in businesses and schools. Previously, it was CRT, critical race theory. Now it's DEI.
Yeah.
Missouri colleges have fully removed their diversity offices. Lessons about racial and gender identity have been
Oh,
phased out in a lot of places. I just saw a Senate bill. It's Senate 506, which says that lawyers wouldn't have to complete training on bias, diversity, inclusion, or cultural competency
I hadn't
each
seen that
year.
one yet.
This proposal was offered by our dear friend Senator Nick Schroer
Oh,
of St.
of course it
Charles
was.
County,
Of course it was.
the Republican, as you may have guessed. He also believes in this legislation that lawyers could not have to do the same amount of ethics training. He's going to cut that the requirements for ethics training for
That
lawyers, which
tracks.
doesn't seem like a great thing. But let's talk about
No,
that.
you could, because
So,
everyone already knows that lawyers are just naturally also ethical and don't need reminders on things like ethics rules, right?
but Nick is a lawyer,
He
right?
is.
So
And
he thinks he doesn't
And I'll
need
tell
it.
you, a whole lot of the lawyers in the House and the Senate have gone to the trainings that have been done at the House. So I've sat through some of them with them.
Mm-hmm.
Last year, I sat through one with most of the House lawyers that talked about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and actually talked about like all of these different fascinating studies that showed how people who are not intentionally being biased respond completely differently to situations depending on their perceived otherness of the
That's right.
person in the situation. Like the person cutting the lock off a bike in a public park, and when you run this experiment with a white woman, for example, you get one outcome of people literally going and trying to help her cut it as she's saying it's not her bike. But if you have a young black man who's even dressed well, people are calling the police on him. And it's just fascinating because there's so many studies out there, that show this. And when it then moves on to hiring and workforce issues, it gets way harder to see for a lot of people because they don't realize that they're hiring somebody that they just connected with, right, in that interview. But when most of your workforce looks one certain way or comes from one certain background, that means they're more inclined to hire people that look like them, that remind them of them, that they connected with. And they might actually miss people that are more qualified and better for the job because they didn't have that connection that they didn't even realize was a bias. And that is what DEI has been about. That's what it's supposed to be about teaching us to try and see past some of those barriers that get in our way of our own biases and try and make sure we actually have the best workforce, which is a diverse workforce. It also, so that we can make sure we're providing services at whatever business it is or whatever government agency it is. If you're providing services to a diverse range of constituents, you need people that they can identify with both directions in order to build relationships with them. That's important. And if you're not making sure that you're doing that as a business, you're actually not going to be as good at your job. And now,
Yeah.
what's fascinating to me is we've had lots of hearings about this, Joe, and with people like Ben Baker sitting in that hearing, just to be clear. And
Yeah.
and what's amazing is we'll talk about a rural example because diversity, equity, inclusion isn't just about race, right? It's about your background. And there are a lot of places where having a rural background is actually a disadvantage in access to resources and opportunities, right? And so, like with admissions and hiring, favoring people from zip codes that are underserved usually means some urban zip codes and rural zip codes. When we point that out, they're like, oh, well, we're okay with that. We're
Mm-hmm.
okay with that. Just it better not be anything about racial background or culture. And we're like, but
Yeah.
what if we also see those disparate impacts based on that, just like we do with zip code? Doesn't matter. That's off limits because that's helping people that don't look like me. And frankly, that is their reaction.
Yeah,
Um,
that's does not surprise me. It's also age, by the
oh
way.
yeah,
There are I don't and you hit a lot of them. You spoke to that really beautifully. I mean, as someone who's been through a lot of corporate training,
yeah, yeah,
uh, I spent most of my career, in the corporate world, um, and I've been through diversity, equity, and inclusion training,
yeah. Lots of
and
them.
it really is just that. I mean, it's about explicit and implicit bias. It's about providing a path to have the most qualified and best candidates to help
Yeah,
your business. It's not about like satisfying people who have a political axe to grind. It really isn't.
yeah. Well,
That's the whole point. And
it's
and
the
and I'm just
opposite, right?
the opposite. If your belief is that this is about meritocracy
Yeah,
and DEI prevents the best people from being in the place where they can do the best work, that's exactly opposite. You've got it flipped.
right,
The whole goal of these type of programs is to essentially eliminate the barriers
right.
that exist.
Well,
It's not to favor a certain race or age or zip code. It is to prevent the
that's
exclusion
exactly right.
of those
And
things.
it's also not just for access to, right? It's not just for hiring people. It's also for keeping them and having them be happy in their jobs. Because one of the things you learn in these programs that they're designed to do, if they're done well, is about just showing respect to your coworkers and understanding that everyone comes from different backgrounds. And again,
Yes.
all kinds of different backgrounds, not just racial backgrounds or cultural backgrounds, but like I said, even understanding somebody from rural Missouri might speak about things a little differently than someone from urban Missouri, right? And being able to make sure that that person is respected and that they're heard and that they feel welcome actually makes everybody work better together. I mean, we banned last year, the state legislature banned diversity programs in the Missouri government, right? And yet our government agencies were coming to us saying this is so destructive to everything we do, and they were showing us how in departments where they had tried DEI programs, the people that had gone through them actually had a higher retention rate than the people that didn't because they were finding their workforces were working better. And so in a state when we have massive
Yes.
vacancies, massive hiring problems, and terrible turnover because people are underpaid and all of these other things and overworked, right? And yet we see this tool is actually it's helping those problems. And they're going, yeah, but it offends me because it makes me feel bad about having any privilege, right? Like it's telling them they don't deserve anything they got. Um, so we have to get rid of it, even if it makes everything worse. Again, they don't care about actual policy and actual outcomes. They care about what message is easy for them to sell to their base, that they're getting riled up about these issues. And that's it. I mean, that's all these guys are doing. They're putting on a show. And then I will
Yeah.
also say one other thing. If
Yeah.
you're worried about DEI and think, as these guys will say out loud, that it's destroying a meritocracy, they think the world that existed. I think one guy stood on the floor last year saying America was founded on being a meritocracy, and this is destroying that legacy. We're sitting here going, you mean the America where only white men even had rights and could get jobs? I mean, women weren't even allowed to have a job or own property, let alone minority groups. But that was a meritocracy because white men were in power. So it was obviously a meritocracy, right? He said that, right? Um, let's just look at Donald Trump's appointments to any position and their actual qualifications. You mentioned the woman that runs that emergency management agency in California being
Yep.
highly qualified. Let's just compare
Highly.
Donald Trump's qualifications for president to Kamala Harris's. And yet people were calling her a DEI hire.
Yeah. But
and
that's the thing
saying, but
about
he's
politics.
earned it. He's earned it with all of his failing, bankrupt companies and all of the people he preyed on and stole money from in his career, and being on a reality TV show.
But I think you actually said this to me a couple days ago, which is that that's the thing about politics is that it doesn't necessarily reward
Right.
experience.
Right.
It rewards other
Yeah.
things. But I'll tell you what, and this may likely what this will do is it will just screw up government uh, programs, government
Oh yeah.
services, those types of things. That's really where this type of thinking and this type of legislation is going to screw things up. Schools, as an
Mm-hmm.
example. What it's not going to screw up is businesses. And let me tell you why. Because what businesses will do is, yes, they will do things like you're seeing now.
Find a
Bunch of
way around it.
yes, bunch of
Yeah.
big businesses are claiming that they are removing their DEI programs or their DEI departments. You know what they're doing instead?
Renaming
That they're
it.
just not advertising. They're creating a new program that's called an inclusion
Yes.
program.
Yeah.
A corporate inclusion program, which is going to do the same shit because you know why? Because it works.
Because
Because
HR departments have a job of trying to make sure that their human resources are effective, and they know that these are important pieces of it, whatever you call them.
yeah, that's exactly right. So, you can let politicians gaslight you into making government services
That's
and
what it is.
schools and other things like that worse. You can let them gaslight you into making like services like police and
Yep.
firefighters worse. Because here's the thing, too. You know, I see people complain when folks say, hey, the police, fire department, other government services should actually be more representative of the populace at large. So we need more people that look like the
Yeah.
people they
Yeah.
serve in those positions. Well, that's just a fact. In fact, did you know that very recently a federal judge sided with the Naval Academy to allow them to use race in admissions for the Naval Academy. And the reason for that is because they said that the evidence shows that a diverse military is a stronger military.
Yep.
Wow,
There it
I'm
is.
shocked.
But evidence, Joe. I mean, whose evidence, right? If I see one expert that says otherwise, well, then it's a gray area. It's open for debate. That's what we talked
But
about last time.
you notice, Peter, that if you actually look at a lot of this legislation, at least on the national level, it all excludes armed
Right.
forces.
Right.
So that seems like an admission to me.
To some
But
degree.
again, what do I know?
Yeah, Ben Baker, talking about him again, he went on a radio show last year that some folks highlighted even on the floor, and he got really defensive about it. But where he basically got up and was talking about how he thinks because we have pilots that are not just white men, that it's because of diversity and inclusion programs, and now we're going to have more dangerous pilots in the air because we've made it a more diverse profession. And the problem is, I think he actually believes that. And I think a lot of them do. They really believe that what these DEI programs are doing are saying, well, even though we have a better white man pilot candidate for this job, we're going to hire this person that it comes from a different category, a different background to be the pilot, even though they're less qualified. When, again, I just got to say it, it's actually just trying to make sure that when you see somebody who is actually more qualified, you don't miss it because they didn't look the way you expected. And that,
That's right.
for most of our history, is what people do because it's what we all naturally do. We think somebody looks like me, and he reminds me of me when I was that age getting into this field. Well, that's how people ended up getting hired, right? We have to do our best to try and make sure we're actually getting people like Ben Baker a better pilot if there was a better pilot available and not missing that opportunity.
And lastly, I will say, Ben, if you're listening, I don't mean to just pick on you. You just happen to be the one that got under my craw this week because I saw all of your tweets. And if
He did it on
you,
purpose, Joe.
I'm sure he did. And if you, sir, put forth some legislation that I think is good, I'll highlight it
That's right.
on this show. Although I have a sneaking suspicion that he is then saying, if I'm highlighted on that show, I will be very disappointed in myself.
Yeah, no, he prefers this kind of highlighting. I'll tell you that right now. But I will say,
sure.
Ben is somebody that knows, and he and I have worked on amendments behind the scenes to bills when we see an opportunity where we agree on how to make something better. He'll use my help on that. He just won't want the public to know it.
Sure, of course. Well, that's
Yeah,
politics.
it is.
And with that, we have reached the end of our show this week. I hope you will join us again in the future, where we will discuss important bits of news in Missouri politics and even dive deeper into some of the biggest issues facing our state. If you have thoughts, topics you'd like to see us discuss in the future, please leave us a comment or write us a review. You can find us on the major social media platforms. Please share the show with your friends, or people that you don't like that you think should listen to this. Just search for What's Up with Mo, and hopefully you'll find us. Please subscribe, follow, all the things, and thank you for spending a little time with us today. I am Joe.
I'm Pete. See y'all next week.